Today, I'm very happy to welcome two guests to the podcast who both work for the Full Circle Care Program in Minnesota, which Minnesota really impresses me these days. You've got a lot going on there in that state. We'll have to talk about that. But my two guests are Jane Whitlock and Liza Neal. Jane trained as an end of life doula through Doula Givers out of New York City in 2015. And in 2018, she delivered a Minneapolis TEDx entitled What Death Taught Me About Life, which launched her career as a death educator. She is a co-founder of the Minnesota Death Collaborative and a member of the board for End in Mind, a Minnesota-based nonprofit dedicated to educating people in having important end-of-life conversations. Currently, Jane works as an integrative care specialist, end-of-life doula at a skilled nursing facility where she co-founded Full Circle Care, which we'll be talking about today, back in 2021, a program to support residents and their loved ones during end-of-life journeys. So welcome, Jane, and it's good to see you here at last on the podcast.
Great to be
and
here.
and I'm also welcoming Liza Neal. Liza is a chaplain who partners with Full Circle Care to journey with elders living on the margins through aging, illness, and death as community and witness. Liza has spent more than 2 decades developing spiritual community, both within and outside faith, multi-faith, and non-institutional contexts, as well as counseling survivors of sexual violence. Liza was the founding director of Spiritual Life at Hampshire College, co-founded a trans asylum seekers ministry, and served in a variety of parish settings before joining Providence Place, a skilled nursing facility in Minnesota, to be part of a team of chaplains and doulas in the Full Circle Care Program. So, Liza, welcome and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
So ever since Jane reached out and talked to me about the Full Circle Care Program, I've been so excited to be able to chat with both of you about this novel program because it represents a collaboration on the one hand, and it's also just creative. And those are things I'm really trying to emphasize that all of us need to focus on in our work. We need to be collaborative and work together and get inspired and do creative, unique things. And so, Jane, I know you are one of the co-founders of this program, Full Circle Care. And so I'd love to have you tell us how this all came about and how it got started.
Yeah. So Providence Place is a nonprofit skilled nursing home, and that is a big piece of why we're able to do this. I think we have a very progressive board that governs us, and they had a history of looking at this community and thinking about what are the needs that are unique to Providence Place that we can address. So prior to end of life, they had done an initiative around integrative care. And then they have a person on the board who is responsible to make that initiative happen. That person is Nancy Bond. So she had gotten integrative care going here in 2013. And then in 2020, they realized, we have this population that for a lot of reasons becomes fractured from family in a lot of cases, and they are dying alone. How can we support these people? And because Nancy had a knowledge of death doulas and eventually became a death doula herself, she suggested hiring a death doula. I don't think it would have happened without having someone on the board who knew about us. So she reached out to me, and I came here in January, and it's been 4 years, and I would say it's taken 3 to 3.5 to really feel like we're moving in the direction that I imagined in that first day, first week. So I think it's really important. The nonprofit part and the board and the initiative and the person kind of was this perfect storm to make this program land here when it did.
I love hearing that this happened in your facility, and it's the potential it could happen elsewhere, because many years ago I served as one of my little part-time jobs was to be a medical director over a skilled nursing facility. And looking back, I realized there was no program to deal with grief for our residents. And yet they were confronted with grief every day. And so was the staff. And I think back how how was that even possible? But realizing where we've come in our healthcare system, that grief has just been um, untouched subject in so many settings. It's not surprising, I guess.
Yeah, I would say I feel like the message is still is there's not time for grief. In this medical model, there is not time for grief. That's one of my favorite parts about this job is I do new employee orientation and tell them about the doulas and the full circle care program. And one of the first questions I ask is, what is your experience with death on the job, and did you feel supported? And the stories people tell, the very first story is that the message is you're going to handle this alone, and any difficulty you are having with that, you are going to shoulder this alone and just get back to work. So when I am telling aides and nurses about this program, like some of them become emotional. Like they're so happy that their emotional selves and their grief is going to be supported and welcomed here, and something that we build community around.
Hmm.
And
That's really,
it's something that I think that my experience coming into it is that the primary way to respond was just suck it down. You just suck down your grief and you become separate, which then ripples out into becoming separate from yourself, separate from staff, separate from residents. And that part of what is so amazing and fabulous is being able to create space and time that isn't separate from the work that they're doing, but is holding their actual human selves within the work that they're doing.
mm. Yes, that's so beautiful. Well, and tell us a little bit more, Liza, about what attracted you to come, because you came a few years ago in the sort of after the program was created. What attracted you to come and be part of it?
Well, I was looking for community, really. And I had moved here from Massachusetts, so it's new to Minnesota, and was looking for a different type of serving, a different type of ministry, and wanting to connect with human beings and be in a place that was creating community and a community of care. And so when I came into this, I was somewhat confronted with the healthcare system, which is really not a community of care. But I found with the doulas that it was completely different, that it was a different way of approaching the community here, both the residents and the staff, and also just being able to be a part of building and evolving the relationship between chaplains and doulas, which has, I think, was different before and has been evolving, and we've been able to evolve that relationship and have it come to a place where we see ourselves as being the same department, that we might officially have we might have official separate departments, but in terms of how we work and how we see one another, that this is one program.
Mm. Well, I probably should have asked you to begin with, Jane, to just talk about what the program consists of, or what is it? What is full circle care?
Yeah.
Maybe you could just give us a summary of what you do.
Right. That's in a way that's $1 million question, because we are in this medical model and they want things nailed down in pieces, and the work is more fluid than that. So our goals are, number one, to meet people where they are. I think there's some palliative doctor that said 83% of people on hospice are never asked, what are your hopes and fears around this process? So at a very base level, we want to make sure that we are asking those questions and that we are making referrals when necessary, or we are making vigil plans, or we are offering life review activities or some people, they don't want to talk at all about it, and that's okay too, but we are companioning them as their physical self is diminishing, and we are focusing on comfort, and we are focusing on making the room more homey. You know, most people want to die at home, and I always tell people, you know, it's not always possible, but we are a pretty good second choice, because we can, you know, we can change the lighting, we can change furniture, we can change, you know, art, we can change music, whatever. So I don't have a prescription for what full circle care is, but I hope that every person in full circle feels seen and heard, and there, because hospice now is, I would say, 95% medical. The beginning of hospice, which was so non-medical, has basically, as the for-profit model comes into hospice, it becomes more, you are your symptoms. And so at least this person has a doula coming in their room and sitting and saying, how are you doing today? Or you're new to hospice, how is that for you? And, you know, still 80% of our job is compassionate listening and just being able to hold whatever uncomfortable things they're holding. I think we do a lot of education about choices they might not even realize they have, about how this, I always say death is collaborative. So we want to make sure that they can collaborate as much or as little as they want, and that it's all okay. There are many right ways. And their way will be unique to who they are and how they have lived their whole lives. So how's that for a description?
I was going to say, I love it that you don't have a set of bullet points of it's this, and this, because that's how death and dying are. It's all happening in the moment. We can't really, we have to just go with the flow wherever it takes us. And Liza, did you have something to add?
Yes, I wanted to add to that other piece of it, if you will, in a grand, expansive way, is the connections between the individual and the community, that people aren't in fact dying alone in rooms, that they're part of a community and they have friends who are grieving their loss, and there are staff who are grieving their loss, and that we are living in death all of the time because someone has just died last week, and because we are in a process wherever somebody enters the skilled nursing facility, everyone is in the process of aging and becoming ill and increasing dependence and dying. We are, in fact, all of us dying. And we live with the reality and the complexity of that grief and enter it into it in all these places. And so being able to attend to the grief of friends, the grief of family, and here, you know, as Jane mentioned earlier, oftentimes people don't have family. And so then the staff and the volunteers then become that community of care as well. And so to be able to provide the support for that and the recognition of that, the recognition of the greater responsibility that it is when someone has been completely lost and isolated, for the staff themselves and the other residents.
Mm. That's really beautiful. It reminded me back all those many years ago when I was affiliated with a skilled nursing facility. When someone died, they would remove the body like at night through a back door. And it breaks my heart now to think about what an opportunity was lost to memorialize and honor the person who died as part of a community. And so, and how many other residents, obviously they knew that person wasn't there anymore. They weren't in the dining hall. They weren't at activities. And yet to think that no one would acknowledge it and allow them to express that pain. It's really sad. And I'm just curious about what do you do when a person dies in the nursing home, and how do you handle that?
I think it starts as, what do you do when a person is dying? And how do you handle that? Because how do you facilitate their friends saying goodbye, you know, entering that vulnerable space? we had a resident die over a year ago, and she was a well-loved member of the community. And we had done so much teaching around how you say goodbye and that people aren't going to respond to you. And, so for her, when she was actively dying, it was just a steady stream of friends going in there and holding her hand. And she specifically said, I don't want any pity. I just want them to come in here, tell me, goodbye. And the last word I want them to say is God bless. So I instructed the friends. They did that. And I have a personal, when I say goodbye before I leave, and I always say, I don't know if this is the last time I'm going to see you, but in case it is, I want you to know. And I said my goodbye. And she said, I had no idea how important I was to this community. So teaching people how to say goodbye is something that gets overlooked as well. And so then when someone dies, we have a ritual.
But before we get to that, I want to also say teaching family how to say goodbye, and, especially when the person is no longer responsive, to encourage family to still say the things that they never said, and to give them the space for the idea that they're still taking that in, and that this is truly their last chance, and to go ahead and do that and not be afraid to hold their hand, and all of those things.
Yeah, but and that's a great point. And I always felt like when the nursing home, the nurses call and say, oh, there's been a change, you should probably come in, it's time to say goodbye. I aspired to always have someone here, a chaplain or a doula or a volunteer, to meet the family at the door, check in with them, see what is their experience with death and dying. How are you feeling? Are there kids there? Is there some education and prep that needs to be done with the kids? And then bringing them upstairs when they're ready. And I usually sit outside the door, so family goes in, but I'm there if they need anything. And if there's kids, I can bring the kids down to a room downstairs, and we have books about death and dying, and we can draw pictures and make notes for their grandmother and say goodbye. We're not totally there, but I think that is just such an important piece as a family member, to be met at the door and someone checking in with you and holding that space through the
time. And also the vigil that happens when someone is, they're near the end, and trying to make sure as much as possible that there's a doula, a chaplain, a volunteer who sits with that person. And also that vigil happens for everybody. It's not just for those who have, family to come and be at the door. Although it is really comforting for family to know that when they leave, there's still going to be someone with the person that they love, but also that for those who have no one, that they too will not be dying alone.
Wow, this is it's touching my heart because it's so beautiful, and because it really meets the needs. It fills a gap that I think has been there for such a very long time, such a painful gap. And I'm curious about, so I know you have 2 doulas and 2 chaplains in the facility, and the 4 of you work together, and it sounds like you share the responsibilities. And maybe you could tell us, like Jane, what the doulas do, and Liza, what the chaplains do, and then how do you communicate and how do you work together?
I think in the beginning, it's a lot of the doulas. When someone goes on hospice, we're meeting with them. We're seeing if they want to do a vigil plan. And if they do, we fill that vigil plan out. And when they start actively dying, it is in their room. So if staff want to interact in that dying process, they know they can say this prayer, or they can read this poem, or they can put on this music, or they can, whatever, which I think is so good for staff grief. And we're just visiting them regularly. We are getting to know family. We're gauging where family is in this process. We're interacting with hospice. We're sort of advocating for residents sometimes, as a family member might, to just connect with nursing, to say, like, this is what I'm seeing. I've been sitting with this person for an hour, and then the nurse will come in and assess the person. So doulas are doing a lot of that front end, building trust, educating, and kind of preparing for the journey so that when it comes, people know what it's going to look like. I often say, would you like to know the trajectory? And that question stops people in their tracks. And often they'll say, no. And then 7 minutes later, they're like, yes, I would like to know. And then they're just so much better prepared. And I think when active dying starts, well, let me back up. If the person has, like, we have a lot of vets here, and uncover a lot of that kind of trauma and moral injury. And then I will let the chaplains know, hey, this person is struggling with this. And then they will pick that part of it up.
So I would also say that part of the chaplain piece is that we're sitting with and compassionately listening and working with folks who are not yet on hospice. And they too are in a process of grief because they are grieving people that they've lost here and elsewhere. They're grieving the diminishment of their own bodies. And we can, and as well as just what that means, wrestling with what mortality. I mean, what all of us are wrestling with, death and mortality. And what does it mean? And how do you still have purpose when you have been cut off, as we've done with our elders, when you've been cut off societally? And then on top of that, and how do you wrestle with maybe you didn't live the life that you wanted to live, and maybe you didn't treat your family the way that you wanted to be treated, or they didn't treat you that way. And so wrestling with sort of all those different kinds of grief, and then also being able to identify, oh, someone just got this diagnosis and they're fine. Except that they're now dying, and not in that way of like we're all dying, but they know quite specifically, what they're dying of. And so now they've moved into a really different place. And so both being able to meet people there and talk about those issues, and also to be able to call on the doulas and, now this person is, now they are in this process and they could really use all of this information and care. And I'm always like, the more care, the better. Right. Like everyone should be seen by doulas and some hospice and, chaplains, and the more the better to hold everyone. And so I feel like just the way that we can share information and hold each other's work, and be able to identify what would connect with people, especially as it changes. Someone's sense of what their spirituality is may be one thing until they learn that they're dying, and now it's suddenly radically changed. So, life is complicated, and then death is complicated.
Yeah.
And we can meet people in all of those places.
And I loved you were saying earlier about a part of all this is creating a sense of community within the skilled nursing facility that includes the staff and the residents and all of you in the community. And I was just thinking of how important that is in terms of feeling a sense of purpose, because just being a member of a community gives us a purpose, because we have neighbors, we have other people to look out for and look after when we see ourselves as part of a bigger whole. And it seems like that's a really important function that you perform as well, to maintain that sense of community and remind everyone they are being held within this community and they're part of it.
And I do think that's particularly unique to us because it's not, that's not part of the medical model. That's not part of the healthcare system. It's not about community, and it is about community, but we are really the only ones who it's our place, our job, our mission to raise that and try to communicate that. And which we didn't answer your question actually about what we did when people actually died. But I think it really relates to this actually. Yeah. Because so we do a sending ceremony when someone has died, and we try to do it at the time of death when the funeral home arrives, so that we can have the ceremony and then walk the body out. Sometimes that doesn't always work because people die in the hospital, or they die really late at night and the staff doesn't feel like they can do that. So it doesn't always happen right at that moment, but we always do ascending, and we do that even when, no one knew the person who passed. We still have ascending, and we share that. So sometimes the chaplains do it and sometimes the doulas do it, and we are all there. We are all present in it. So when I say do it, I mean lead it. But we all are present during the sendings as long as we're all, working at the time. But we can hold that all of the time and sort of share that back and forth. And in that, we also have the opportunity to find out, like, who are the residents who are particularly grieving. If it's not something we already know, which usually we do, but not always, who are the staff who are particularly touched by this. And so then later on, we can connect with those residents, connect with those staff. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes community happen, and also makes it feel like it's not this one moment when somebody dies that you grieve at this sending ceremony and then we're all done, but the reality that it's ongoing and that we all continue to grieve together. And a huge piece of that is that we're touching base with people and connecting with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if we don't do the sending, staff and residents come to us saying, like, when are we doing the sending? Mm.
You've created a culture there that people have come to rely on. And and I'm just curious, Jane, about how it sounds like doulas and chaplains each have their own separate functions too that they perform, and then this overlapping work that you do together. How do you do it logistically? Do you have team meetings every day, or how do you or maybe it isn't, maybe it's more organic than that, I don't know.
Pretty organic. We're drawn to each other anyway. Now our offices are right down the hall. We're 5 feet away from each other, so that's super helpful. The doulas have a cell phone that they carry with them, so this is a practical way that the doulas can just call the chaplains and say, hey, family is here, or hey, it looks like the family does want last rites or anointing of the sick, and those kind of in the moment immediate communications. Mm-hmm. I love that our lane is community building. That's what came to me while you were talking. That is really what we do, because part of the doula work is honoring the work that the aides and the nurses are doing, and honoring the fact that they are being asked to carry more weight than is good for them, and that we are here to try to take some of that off. We started this thing called the farewell room. So after a resident dies, the doulas go in and kind of clean up the room, and we put a fresh quilt on the bed with a big tray of candles and flower petals, and we set an empty chair next to the bed, and we put on nice music, and we put this sign outside the door, and I just want to read it. Farewell room. The doulas and chaplains have created this space for you. Saying goodbye to someone is a ritual we do to help feel the grief that we experience regularly as part of our jobs. Ritual creates a pause in our day. It creates a space where we can connect to our heart, spirit, Please take some time in the room. Sit down and close your eyes. Bring the person you are missing to mind. Take a deep breath in, and with your exhale, quietly thank them for being a part of your life. Let memories come to mind. Feel gratitude for the good and the challenging moments you shared. Acknowledge how this person has changed your life. Wish them well on their journey. We hope you find this a healing and restorative experience. We offer this in appreciation for the work that you do every day. And we have seen that staff will come and sit, and that basically the bed is becoming an altar where people are adding things. They're putting their favorite hat, or people will buy Pepsi or whatever their pop was and put it there. Or it's this real community building thing. And we always check with staff, like, are you ready to take the farewell room down? And if it's been a long time residence, oftentimes they will say no, leave it for another day.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Also, I think something that has shifted in the sending, I don't know if that's true that's shifted, but when I think about kind of the template that we originally had and sort of where it is now, that part of what we do is also recognizing the care of the staff in the sending ceremony, and how much time and care and that they have given. And so to be able to recognize that and appreciate that, and that has been sort of something that's shifted into that and creates, again, another acknowledgement of their grief, another sense of community, because they're grieving together, we're all grieving together. It's this place where residents and staff we're just all together grieving. But also to be able to acknowledge their work and appreciate them for that. I think, there aren't a lot of places where people are just being appreciated. And that happens in memorials and sendings for the person who's dead. And so we try to take the opportunity to also make that appreciation for the staff and the residents.
And I see that as an antidote to burnout, really, because when you're appreciated for how hard you're working, it kind of changes everything. It's like, oh, my work has a purpose. I'm doing something really good here. And it's amazing, as when I think about it, as you're saying that, how little we do acknowledge the helpers and the caregivers and the people who are out there putting in extra time to take care of everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I would say we include like the maintenance people and the housekeeping and the dietary. And so, I have people coming to me because they know I'm the death person. They'll be like, hey, have you seen so-and-so who's not even on hospice? They're like, I'm worried about them. Like, let's check on them. So it is, everybody takes responsibility for looking out for everybody. And I do feel like it's somehow part of this program where we keep reminding people that they're a part of this, an important part of this community. One other way we do that is we have a memorial ribbon tree out front. I've always been a big fan of public memorial space. And our executive director, he used to be a social worker, so he's just very supportive of, he gets why those things are important. So it wasn't even hard. He was like, sure, let's do it. So now when we just had a memorial that was really tough, we offer ribbons to everybody, and then they write the name and a message, and we go out there together and we tie them on the tree. And my hope is they can see, like, there are old griefs on this tree, and yours is a new grief. And, we all know how to do this. It will come to all of us. And you have come to a place that knows how to support you in your grief. And we do that for staff. If we hear that staff has had a loss, the doulas will go to them with a ribbon and ask if they want to fill it out. And
which is another thing which, because we have a lot of folks who don't have family, their family system has broken down. And so they've had people die and they weren't ever able to be a part of the funeral or memorial, or there never was one. And so this has become something that we can do with residents for, losses that they've had previously in their life that they were never able to publicly mourn. And I think that has been a significant appreciation for folks. And I know for me, this is not exactly related, but I was thinking about it when you were talking about people coming to you. That's what it was. And it's such a gift for me. Like if I'm leaving and I know someone's, having a hard time, and whatever, I don't come in the next day, I can text the doulas and be like, hey, can you look in on, and it's not like somebody who's dying necessarily, but I am concerned for them for who knows, whole monopoly of, is that a word? Of other things that are a part of people's lives. But, I can say, hey, Jane, go stop in and just, be a comforting person. And that's such a gift for me.
Right. That helps your burnout, my burnout. Yeah.
Yeah, what an amazing team you've created and the impact it's having on this community within the skilled nursing facility that you helped create, really. I mean, I think community of a type probably does form within those facilities anyway, because people are living there together. But it used to be a community that didn't deal with death and dying and grief and the sorrow that we feel. And so to bring it out in the open and be able to share it and carry it together, it's so beautiful. I mean, if I have to move to Minnesota before I end up in a skilled nursing facility, I guess, so I can, because I would love to receive care like that if that were ever needed.
Yeah, you're right. I think Providence Place has always had this organic community where the residents really look out for each other because they have to. And that was part of what drew me here is someone told me, oh, I can see you fitting in there, because it doesn't have the fancy bells and whistles and blah, blah, blah. It's just like people looking out for each other.
Mm. And I
Yeah.
wonder, from the beginning, Jane, were there obstacles that you faced or that you even face now in trying to get this program going and trying to meet your goals and grow as you would like?
Yeah, of course, right? This is brand new. I didn't really know what the program looked like. And when you're trying to, this was a board initiative. This is not the staff in the building did not ask for this. They were just coming out of COVID, healthcare, the stresses they have on them already. And then skilled nursing homes are the most regulated. They're more regulated than nuclear reactors. That's what my ED keeps telling me. So they have a lot of stress already. And then they have someone like me coming in who's like, being like, oh, did you know about this? Like, how do people die in your building? And they just want to be, my ED said to me once, we mostly believe that hospice is taking care of people who are dying. He said, it wasn't until I met the doulas that I didn't really get that it wasn't happening the way I imagined it. So, of course, they were like, what is your lane? What are you doing? There was a lot of, I had to build trust with people because, I am, the director of nursing. If I do something stupid, I don't pay the price. She pays the price, So, I worked really hard to build trust, and there were plenty of times. The ED said to me the other day, he said, I'm pretty sure you're going to walk like 5 or 6 separate times. And I was like, try 10 or 12. But then I would just remind myself, like, we are making change. And to be a change maker is to be uncomfortable and to not really have a place and to be alone a lot. And that's why I'm so grateful for the chaplains and having another doula here because it is really hard work to do alone when nobody trusts you. But I would say now this program has been fully accepted and we are fully integrated with all disciplines and people know what we do and they value it. And so it was totally worth I'm going to say it was totally worth the struggles. We'll have to ask Noel. We'll have to have a separate thing with that. I did present at a conference with my ED, and I would say my spiel, and then it'd be like, no. And he would give that, the administrative, the things about skilled nursing that I didn't understand that I thought could just happen because I had no idea. I probably should have gone to skilled nursing boot camp for 5 months until they let me come in the building.
I think the first 5 months is skilled.
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
the board has always believed in us, and so we've always had that support, which has been helpful.
That sounds key, but really, they are kind of two different worlds, and I mean, I guess that's the obstacle that all of us who are trying to shift the way we care for people at the end of life, we have that same obstacle because we're operating in a world and in systems that are really resistant to talking about death and dying and acknowledging it and dealing with grief. So, as you said, to be a change maker, we have to get used to this idea that we're just going to be out there alone sometimes and we're going to get criticized, we're going to face challenges. But that's kind of what makes the work so exciting and so worthwhile in a way, so gratifying. So, do you have any ideas of where you are going to head from where you are right now, where you want to go, or additional things you want to take on, or is it just continuing to grow as you are?
I think I would like to, when we first started, we did a lot of staff training. We did a death meditation with staff where they could actually be the person in the bed feeling that vulnerability. And staff really appreciated it. And I think it did change their care in some ways, tone of voice and touch and the importance of telling people what you're going to do before you do it. I mean, your care really does have to change once someone becomes that vulnerable. And I don't think they get that message. I'm a CNA. I did not get that message in my training. I don't think other people do. You learn it on the job. So I would love to do more staff training. I usually have a laundry list of things that I would like. So yes, I have plans to keep growing this and keep responding to needs. We just did a pinning ceremony for a vet. And Liza, do you want to talk about that? I mean, it's just super healing.
Sure. Being a vet is extremely complicated, and particularly we have a lot of Vietnam vets. And that is especially complicated, a complicated war, and a complicated return. And, many of the vets are dying from Agent Orange. And so, we can't just come in sort of, yay, good job, because it's far more complicated than that. And so it's wonderful to be able to have a pinning ceremony and be able to also recognize, just like we're recognizing the complexity of grief, recognizing the complexity of military service and the complexity of being a veteran and the ways in which we are a part of that. We have responsibility for how Vietnam veterans were received when they came back to this country. And we have a responsibility now. War is not actually some sort of separate thing that happens far away, and it has nothing to do with us. We're intimately a part of what happens to people and a part of their lives and their healing and their death. And so to be able to recognize that and to be able to address that within a ritual, and also making that open, making that loving, holding reality a full healing moment for people, rather than to try to compartmentalize all of those things, to state things out loud. I mean, it's very much the same thing with death, really. We're just stating it out loud and holding the space for all of the complexity of that.
Wow, that's really powerful to hear, and such a good reminder that all the Vietnam veterans are now coming near to the end of life. And so a lot of people who do this work are going to be meeting those veterans and need to be aware of the needs that they have.
Mm-hmm. Which is also something I think that much like someone's spirituality shifts when suddenly they're dying, someone's experience with their service um, or their engagement with the reality, just like you're doing a life review and you're engaging with the reality of who you've been and what you've done and what you haven't done. You know, it's a time that can bring people to engage with their service in a very different way than they're engaging with it, 10 years ago, or, when they were healthier, when they were not dying, all of those things. You could push things away in a way that you can't. And that's with everything, not just military service, but we compartmentalize our lives in order to survive trauma. And we all have trauma. And so being able to just state out loud that we all have trauma. And this is a time when it's the moment that all of that arises. And we have to be able to hold that.
It arises,
we can be able to hold it. And we're creating systems and rituals and places and ways to be able to say, we can help you hold that, which then also means you can hold that.
And because at that particular time, nearing the end of life, there's probably more openness than ever before to accepting a new view of what has happened, or to finally look at the trauma and work toward healing it.
Yeah, and I think almost to their surprise, sometimes they can let this man that we did a pinning ceremony for recently was really openly sad about it, and telling the stories that he came home to and how much pain they caused him. And Liza did this beautiful blessing about, the nation repenting for the harm that it has done to its soldiers. And we have 14 doula volunteers, and one of the volunteers was taking him back to his room. And he said almost to no one in particular, wow, that was really healing. So this is like almost the last chance we get to get it right, or at least to hold space for it.
Wow. Oh, wow. I have goosebumps because just the stories you've told, and just the insights that you have, in the beautiful way that you're working together. So inspiring. And I personally would love to see this idea replicated in other skilled nursing facilities, because we know the same needs that existed where you are right now are everywhere. And I'm wondering, do you think this is something that could be replicated, that other facilities could do this, given if they had the will to do it, which has to be there, the desire to make this change? But
yeah, I certainly hope so. And that's why I am working so hard to make this program a good model. I think it's administrators, if they have a death phobia that is unexamined, it's really hard to crack that nut. So I think my latest idea is that families really, when they are touring a facility, they need to say, how do you support end-of-life journeys? Like, we need to educate families to be, do you have a doula on staff? Do you do a sending ceremony? Do you have a public place for grief? How do you support staff? People need to ask for these things, so then buildings, it's like basically becomes a marketing tool. And I think people are becoming more educated and more vocal, and I believe in time it will be the norm. I don't see how it can't be.
yeah. Wow, that is a great idea. We need to keep educating the public and making sure, even as we're talking to people about their end of life plans, that they have in mind. You have a right to ask for certain services wherever you end up living or wherever you go for care. You have a right to ask people, how aware are you and how much do you care for people who are at the end of life?
Right. And I think it's really important to face head on the myth that senior living has, that hospice is doing all this for them.
Mm.
So if someone says that to you, you have to say, actually, hospice is going to be in a facility 5% of that person's time. So what's happening the rest of the time?
Mm. Wow, that's an excellent point. I mean, that's such a good way to get that message home to an administrator that those needs are not being met fully and they could
Mhm.
do better.
Particularly in the actual dying, which is wild when that's sort of what hospice was founded, I think. But they're not there in the actual dying. They're coming in as that process, but in the actual end of someone's life, it's us
It is
and
us.
the volunteers. Like
Yeah.
that's who's with them when they're dying. And if there's no one, if there isn't program, then people are dying alone.
Yeah. Yes. How just so tragic. Hospice is involved and has been called in for care, and yet those patients still die alone. And that's just so heartbreaking. So, any tips if there's someone who would like to try to get something like this started? And do you have information available that you could share?
I would say target a nonprofit senior living facility, and probably those. I just read an article about how county-owned nursing homes are all being gobbled up by for-profit models. So if you're a doula and you are interested in getting started, I would say start volunteering at a senior living facility, because then they will see what you do and they will see the value. And family members will see the value of you helping their mom's friend. And they're like, oh, when our time comes, we want a doula. Because they just don't know what they don't know.
That's
And
true.
that's why I'm Patty Brennan and Catherine Feynman. We're coming up with a tool to be like a free tool that hopefully any doula anywhere can bring into their local senior living facility and say, hey, have you ever wondered how well you support end of life journeys and grief? Here's a free assessment tool. So if you can fill it out and give it back to me, then I could recommend some steps to take to be more death positive. And then that death doula can kind of become like a consultant in that building. Like maybe we just start with a send off. Like, how do you do a send off? How do my dad's number one fear was going out with the laundry. He's like, I have lived in this place for 15 years and I've never seen a dead body. So what happens to them?
Oh,
So, and I told his executive director, I said, we're going out the front door, we're playing music, and we are escorting him. And it was a scene. But I mean, I think a good scene. They called me and were like, wow, that really made an impression. Like, how do you do that, etc. But because no one had ever done it, you just, I don't know.
Which I think also happens in the room itself, because people aren't necessarily picked up right away. And so, but because there is now this culture of like, we are there with the body, we do the sending gathered around the body. Occasionally we do sort of the laying on of hands, and then we walk the body out. So there's more, so it's not like somebody dies and then like the doors are closed and it's all private and, with sort of the farewell room. Sometimes people can go in and sit with someone, if it's hours or a day or whatever. People know that they can sit with the body and no one is going to be ushering them out or
hmm.
closing it off.
That's great. And so I love that tip of for death doulas, become a volunteer, get to know the chaplain, the
Yeah,
chaplain who
exactly.
works at the skilled nursing facility and talk about how you might be able to work together. And then also be educating the public. Like, did you know there are certain services that you should be able to have at the end of your life wherever you're living, so that because we have to kind of meet this from different different attack points in a way to try to get this accomplished. But Jane, you mentioned at the time this interview airs, hopefully we can make that assessment tool that you're creating available to people listening, and I'll have an announcement about that to make, to how, where to get it, how to download it, because that sounds very helpful.
Yeah. Great.
Well, it has been so delightful to meet both of you, and I'm so glad that I got to have the two of you here at once to talk together. So I love seeing how you work together, even just in discussing the project you're working on together. But it's clear to me that you're a great team and you're making a huge impact. And I'm so impressed with what you're doing and really excited to be able to share it.
Yeah, and if you'd met Nell and Jared, you'd feel even more that way.
Yeah, yeah. How lovely. Well, I think you've got something here that I'd love to spread to other communities, to other skilled nursing facilities, and I hope we can do that. But thanks for your hard work and thanks for coming today just to talk about this program.
Well, thanks for giving us the opportunity. I should say it has spread to two others. Our senior care community owns two other buildings, and they now have doulas and chaplains working together in them too. So it is spreading slowly.
All right. So that's good to hear. So more of that.
Exactly.
All right. Well, take care and best wishes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words.
You're welcome.